Continuing with our confidence interval estimate for a proportion, let's review our definition of confidence interval. It's a range or an interval of values used to estimate the true value of a population parameter, and in this case we're talking about the proportion. A confidence interval is associated with a confidence level, such as 95%. We also call this the degree of confidence. You'll hear that expression sometimes. So this confidence level is chosen by the researcher prior to beginning data collection. They decide what confidence level they want. Okay, so the confidence level is a probability, 1 minus alpha, that the confidence interval actually does contain the population parameter, assuming that the estimation process is repeated a large number of times. So this confidence level and alpha are complements. The confidence level and alpha are complements. You remember complements. The sum of the two equals 1, right? So if we have a confidence level, which is 1 minus alpha, and we add to that alpha, so here's our confidence level, here's alpha, of course we get 1. So that's the total sum of the probabilities in the sample space. Same idea. So they are complements. So let's look at the most common choices. Since this is a choice researchers make, there are common choices that are made. And let's see, make a little table here. So our confidence levels, and one common confidence level is 90%. So that would mean alpha is 0.10, and we got that 90% by saying 1 minus 0.10 equals 0.90, or that 90%. So you see how those work together as complements. Okay, the next would be 95%. And here our alpha is 0.05. So 1 minus 0.05 is where we're getting that 95% or 0.95. And then finally 99%, so alpha equals 0.01. So 1 minus 0.01, that's that 0.99 or 95%. And let's just make a note here that the 95% is the preferred, or most researchers might choose this one. So I guess this is the most common of the most common of these three, would be 95%, the one that right there in the middle. Okay, so kind of jumping ahead, but just so you can see where we're going, you'll often see in the media some report that looks sort of like this example. And it would say something like, based on a Pew Research Center poll, the proportion of Americans ages 16 and older who read at least one print book, in the past year, is estimated to be 72%, with a margin of error of 2 percentage points. Okay, so that may sound a little familiar, the way that's worded. And in this case, they usually when you see these, maybe there's another sentence that will talk about how many Americans were surveyed, how they chose their sample, maybe if they did phone calls or how they got that information. And so say in this example, and I actually did look this up, their sample size, sorry, that's my lowercase n, let me just cross it out, lowercase n, was 2,986 Americans that they surveyed. And this researcher chose the most common confidence level, I'll just use a capital C, capital L, of a 95%. Okay, so perhaps this would usually be stated along with this. They almost always leave this out, but many times we can just assume it was 95% since that is the most common. So you might even further see the confidence interval estimate given. So for this particular one, ultimately that they got to a confidence interval, and this we'll learn how this is developed later, but right now we just want to talk about this these results in general. We would see something like 0.704 less than p less than 0.7336. So here is our confidence interval. Remember, we said it's a range or an interval of numbers from 0.704 to 0.736. Sorry about that, that is a 3. Okay, so what we're saying here is that they have gotten this proportion of 0.72, but instead of using a point estimate and just saying, okay, well, 72% of Americans, that's our point estimate. That's our estimate of the population proportion. When another way to say it then, with a little more accuracy, is to use an interval, such as this. So usually we aren't, like I said, given the confidence level, but often it is 95%. Okay. So the interpretation of this is we are 95% confident, if they use a confidence level of 95%, that the interval from 0.704 to 0.736 actually does contain the true value of the population proportion of Americans age 16 and older who have read at least one print book in the past year. Okay, so what we're going to learn in the remaining videos on this topic are how we calculate this confidence interval estimate. Okay, and finally, just to kind of restate this and where we're headed in understanding this, this means that if we were to select many different samples of that same size, they'd all have to be the same sample size, 2,986, and constructed all those corresponding confidence intervals. From each one we could calculate a confidence interval. 95% of them would actually contain the true value of the population proportion. We can never be 100% confident of anything. So that's why we see these other confidence levels and not 100%. So what we're saying here is when we use a 95% confidence interval, a confidence level, then we are saying that we are 95% confident that the interval we constructed actually does contain the true population proportion. 5% of the time, if you go out and take another sample, that one may not contain the true population proportion. That's kind of the alternative to that. Okay, so we'll continue with this. This is just kind of looking at the end result and to see where we're headed and to get an overview of confidence interval estimate of the proportion.